taking place, and the collaboration, and the energy, and the excitement over this work and this project has just been building and building. I personally am so excited to take all this energy and move it into a project that is fundable and achievable, and we're going to all work to make that happen. So thank you to all the minds in here, the scientists, the artists, the community members, the indigenous people, all of us coming together for this spectacular event. Thank you all so much. I'm going to pass it over to straight to presenters, or did you want to say something?
I'm
Dr.
not going to give an
Heckenberger.
introduction. I'll thank the participants who are here after we've gotten through the presentations, because I don't want to create a block from getting the primary people. We want to have Chief Fukaka speak first. We have two primary aspects. One we've been calling the fire from within, which is the cultural preservation, of course, of indigenous people themselves, using that as a countermeasure to what you're all familiar with, the fires that are encroaching on indigenous areas, the tropical forests, the flames from without. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chief Fukaka briefly. Dr. Carlos Fausto from the National Museum is going to translate for Chief Fukaka, who's going to speak in his native language. Thank you.
Go get it, Allison.
First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy that you are here, and that's the last time that I'm going to talk, because on Monday I'm going back to my village. I came here with my son, who was there, my son-in-law, and him, that is me, who is learning our language. And I'm here to tell you about the things that are worrying me presently. I also came here to listen to your talk, Mike's talk, Billy's talk, people's talk in general, so that I can come back to the village and tell the people what I have heard. I see here as well people that work with Mike Webb, someone else that was there, and they have been working in mapping our territory so that we can prove that we were there and where we used it to go. My father used it to go to
Fishing.
Sorry?
Fishing.
No, fishing. To fish, to extract resources to do things, etc.
Okay,
So I like very much his work.
Mai ngai là có tôi chỉ tập về cái gì bao tổ tập hồ đơn để học cái tập này tôi tôi tên thì sao kia là tôi gì bao bồi của tôi đã thấy cái và cái chỗ này ví dụ là mai cái thì tôi tiêu phụ này tôiดูtập tôi đây nghĩ là xem nó có cái tập gì mai ngai là mai cái là tôi hỏi là gì.
You have seen, you're probably going to see photographs of places like Tafununu, Ngokuru, Temuku, and places that are part of our territory. Been living for a long time. And this is being mapped through this work. You have seen, you probably can see photographs of places. We have all the stories about these places, and also not only myths, but stories about where we used to go to fish, to do things, and this is what we are mapping now.
Ragazzi, tu che mi ha tempo per ragazzi.
That's all. Next time I can tell you more about it.
Hey, Michael, could we try to get people to stand over here?
So to be on the live stream, the next speakers are going to position themselves right around here. As I said, this meeting of people we drew people together very quickly because, as many of you know, the Amazon is under extreme threat, and particularly in the area that we work along the Xingu River or the Xingu Corridor. And we've been calling this project and this meeting of the minds the Southern Amazon Indigenous Firewall. The indigenous areas, over half of the Amazon is in indigenous protected areas. Within the Xingu Corridor, there's a connected group of indigenous areas and conservation units. That's the largest contiguous protected area of tropical biosocial diversity on the planet. And it is the barrier against not only deforestation, but increased fire threat and other threats from changing climate. And as I said before, we've broken up, the firewall has two parts. One is obviously trying to create a barrier against these threats, and we'll be talking about that during the second part. But this first part is about our partnerships with the National Museum, Museu Nacional, the Museu Gelgi, the People's Palace Project, and Gringo Cargia. They're all going to speak about how we've been working to create a firewall against the erosion of indigenous knowledge, and how we're working together with indigenous people to not only protect their cultural heritage and their cultural practices, their material culture and indigenous knowledge, but also helping them to use that as a mechanism to defend their lands and to help protect an area that really is of global importance. As we all know, the Amazon is such an important component of global climate, of global ecology, and this is what we're here for. And so I'd like to call up some of our partners, Elena Lima from the Museu Gelgi, Carlos Fausto from the Museu Nacional, and then afterwards we'll pass it to Paul Heritage, Gringo Cargia, and Takuman Pikudu to talk about their project with the People's Palace project. Weatherby?
Yes.
You need
Sorry.
to get there.
I don't think it was in this one. Do we need our presentation?
We'll see time.
He's in the hospital.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Good afternoon. My name is become as follows. And I'm going to talk about fire, about outer fire and inner fire. As you all know, our house, the National Museum, the oldest physiological institution in Brazil, was burned to the ground last year, and with it, a huge collection of Amazonian artifacts was transformed into ashes. And what was important about that collection is the fact that it had 200 years history of collecting in the Amazon. So we lost a huge collection which has been constituted different ways for many people for a very, very long time. It represented probably 50% of all Amazonian collections in museums in the Americas. Day one, we started the rescue operation, which is going on, still going on a year later, and it's going to take until at least a year more to finish it. But that's not enough, and fortunately, we have a sort of backup in an institution of which Elena will talk to.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Elena Lima. What was lost at the National Museum fire is immeasurable. It's uncountable. 200 years of history of research has been lost in this fire. The Guilty Museum in Belém tells us a story of 150 years, the second oldest museum in Brazil, and the most important Amazonian collection, cultural collections in Brazil. It safeguards archaeological, linguistic, and ethnographic collections and research. After this fire and this loss, we've brought together strong efforts in order to safeguarding, to guarantee the security of these, physical security as well as digital security of this collection. So we've been digitalizing all information and databases as well as 3D scanning and other initiatives in order to guarantee the security of these collections. Collections that tell a history of 150 years of research, collection that is recognized by Brazilian Heritage Institute as a patrimony, as a heritage of Brazilian populations. Not only current Brazilian populations, but mainly originary peoples who were living in this area. It's about safeguarding, but it's also about bringing these collections back to life, bringing the collections with their true owners, the indigenous and traditional people. So we've been running projects in order to qualify the objects in shared curatorship with indigenous peoples inside the museum. Kayapó people who live in the Xingu Basins got a long history of partnership with Guilty Museum team. This image shows 1905 Kayapó in the museum, as well as current Kayapó. They consider the Guilty Museum as their second house, their house in Belém while they are in Belém. Not only in the museum, but also outside the museum, in the villages, qualifying the Kayapó in order to register their cultures in their own ways, in their own perspectives. So it's about bringing the museum back to life through the indigenous people, through the traditional communities who are inside the museum, and hopefully will bridge together research, communication, and cultures. Excellent.
I come back now with Ramese picture. Unfortunately, he didn't have the Nobel Prize this year, but we're expecting for the next year. He's kind of a strong man. And this is an image of an indigenous artist who lives in Rio de Janeiro, which is from the Rio River, Denilson Vanilla, who has this kind of vision of the Kayapó invading the museum and reanimating it. But the question is, in a sense, how do we review 200 years of history? And one of the sources of our inspiration comes from Hannah Arendt's book, Between the Past and the Future, where she wrote the past stretching all the way back to its origin, instead of pulling us back, pushes us forward, meaning that, contrary to what might be expected, it is the future that couples us back into the past. So our this moment, we have to try to think through the eyes of the future, looking at the past we are constructing now in the present. So what is going to be our legacy, of this generation living, for those to come, for those that will be living, let's say, living in the year 2218, 200 years after the museum was birthed. So let me just talk also about other indigenous tribes, not of the Kayapó, who live to the north here, but in the same basin, the Upper Xingu region, represented here by Chief, who has spoken before. Just an exercise of changing your topology of your mind is to think about time scale. According to studies, archaeological studies by Michael Heckenberger, the Xinguano civilization, so really a civilization, has 1,200 years of history. Colonial and national history is only 500. So we are talking about a civilization with a strong cultural continuity, since it was firstly documented by Paul von Steinen at the end of the 19th century to the present, as you can see by these pictures. The Upper Xingu region was opened, let's say, to the state in the 1940s, and with the state came also the anthropologists and the people working in museums, and systematic research and collection starts in the region. But now, this situation that we see in the 50s has changed a lot, because for the last 20 years, indigenous peoples in this region have been documenting their own culture, producing new cultural products, and in that way bridging generations. As you can see here, this is the late Tabucare, a song master. This is Takumatu Kuru, who is somewhere over there, and Amoneri Kuikuru. So, as I said, it's not only about the past, it's also about the future. Is there a vision for the future for these people? What kind of vision is that? And so we think, and this is what we have been doing for, let's say, 2 decades, is to bridge not only generations, but to bridge civilizations, which means that indigenous and non-indigenous sciences, in the plural, and cultures must enrich each other. Indigenous peoples are not only part of the problem, they are part of the solution of our current dilemmas. And the whole idea here, let's say the cultural part of this project, is to use the inner fire of these millennial cultures to fight back the outer fire and thus build a common future. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our next speakers, Dr. Paul Heritage from the People's Palace Project at Queen Mary College, London, Gringo Cargia, who's an architect and visual artist, and Takuma Kuikuru, who's an award-winning filmmaker, as well as the president of the Kuikuru Indigenous Association.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome. I'm for Heritage. As Mike said, I'm from Queen Mary University of London, and I run an organisation called People's Palace Projects. For the last 20 years, we've had this incredible experience of making work between Brazil and the UK. We're artists. We make artwork happen, and we're interested in what art does. So it's fantastic to be here in the Affirmation Gallery, and to think that art is an affirmative experience. And I suppose one of the challenges that we've been responding to is how, as artists, we can engage with, as non-Indigenous artists, we can engage with Indigenous artists. What's the contact, what's the encounter, what's the new work that we can make? All of us can have an encounter with Indigenous culture, of course we can. We can buy the products. Please do. Part of how we can engage and how we can be involved in other people's culture, that's an exchange. But I suppose what we've been asking, what Gringo and Takamam, we've been asking of each other, is what sort of exchange we can have with each other that will produce this meeting between sciences, technologies, and arts. And that's really the reason we've all been together for 3 days, and what we wanted to talk to you just about one project that the three of us have been making together. Quer falar alguma coisa sobre iniciar? O que é este currículo, este troca, este intercâmbio, currículo com outros artistas? Por que é importante?
Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Estou com o Paul Gringo aqui.
I'm here with Paul
trabalho.
Gringo Cardia, presenting our work.
O problema é que eu sou muito baixinho do que ele aqui. Tá?
It's just that way, it's rather shorter than me, so we just want to...
Ele é seu.
Come on.
Eu acho que essa é a primeira experiência que a gente teve com ele quando fui fazer intercâmbio cultural em Londres, 2015, para fazer esse filme.
So the first time after I visited the village, the first thing we did together was when I invited Takamam to London, and he made a film.
Sim,
Que foi o nome do filme?
Londres como uma aldeia, Até Londres.
Até Londres. London as a village. It's available on YouTube. You can look at it from the People's Palace Project site or the ICAC site.
Então, assim a gente foi construindo ideia junto com o People Palace. Depois a gente eu conheci Brinco Cardia. A gente se conheceu a primeira vez durante os Jogos Mundiais em Bahamas.
So we've had various different encounters to get us here in New York today. For example, first time he met Gringo, yes, was with People's Palace, but then he met Gringo again at because Brazil hosted the Olympics in 2016, they also hosted the World Indigenous Games. So Gringo and Takamam were both at the World Indigenous Games in Brazil. Tocantins.
Uma coisa, eu acho que essa troca de conhecimento, troca de olhares, eu tive essa ideia junto com eles, junto com a comunidade.
So what is the Greek-Wood exchange? It's an exchange based on an exchange of looking. How can we look at each other differently? And how can we create opportunities for that looking?
Uma ideia foi, depois que eu tive viagem para Londres, e como é que podemos fazer outro tipo de trabalho dentro da comunidade, né?
And also, how can we start doing different sorts of work within our own communities, within our villages?
Como eu trabalho com audiovisual, eu precisava aprender mais com algumas artistas, né, junto com a comunidade, não é eu mesmo sozinho, junto com a comunidade, para a gente poder construir as coisas, documentar a cultura através do intercâmbio cultural junto com os artistas.
I'm an artist, I'm a filmmaker. I love my filmmaking, I made films with Carlos Fausto, as he showed the films that they did with Carlos has just been talking about. But I wanted to know how we can now think about, and what I think about is documenting. I've been documenting my cultures. But how can we think about new things that we can do as artists, to look and see, and how can I do it as I've always done it, with my community, with my village, and for my people.
E assim a gente foi construindo, porque todos os pesquisadores não indígenas que entram na comunidade indígena, não é somente eles podem fazer pesquisa sobre o povo. A gente quer fazer uma troca de conhecimento. não é ou realmente que eles estão dando alguma coisa que valor que eles têm. A gente precisa fazer um conhecimento para a gente poder aprender junto com eles. Não é só eles podem aprender sobre indígena, a gente tem que aprender também junto.
And why we talk about exchange? Because we've lived so many years with non-indigenous researchers coming into our peoples and researching us and going away. We wanted to have a new relationship, not just where they were coming to know us. We want to know them as well, but we also want to have an exchange of knowing. How can we know together about this world?
Sim, como tinha falado no início do nosso seminário aqui, na conversa, quando eu estou com pesquisadores que trabalham com audiovisual, eu sou como cineasta, né? Eu trabalho com eles.
When I'm with researchers, I'm there as an audiovisual person. I work through audiovisual work as a filmmaker to research.
Quando eu estou com os arqueólogos, eu sou arqueólogo também junto com eles.
So I become an anthropologist. When I work with the archaeologists, I become an archaeologist.
Quando eu estou com antropólogos, eu sou também antropólogo também.
So I can become an anthropologist, I can become an archaeologist.
Então, isso é uma coisa muito conhecimento que cada um tem, porque para a gente,
work with the knowledge of other people.
Pesquisadores, linguistas, antropólogos, arqueólogos, artistas de audiovisuais, eles são como se fosse uma faculdade para a gente dentro da comunidade.
You're like our faculty. You're like our university. I can be a linguist, I can be an archaeologist, I can be an anthropologist through my work as a filmmaker.
Então, realmente, esse nosso trabalho, junto com a comunidade, com a Associação Indígena de Cultura do Alto Xingu.
And we're doing this how? We're doing this through the association. I'm president of the the Indigenous Cultural Association of the Kwikuru people of the Upper Xingu.
Porque, claro, que a gente tem muita dificuldade de como é que podemos ter alguma coisa de financiamento para a gente poder continuar nosso trabalho.
Because we need to have money to continue our work as an association, as a people, so we have to set up these partnerships.
Porque a gente, muita coisa que falta, temos centros de documentação dentro da comunidade.
So we have lots of things we're missing. We've got a center of documentation in our village.
Como é que nós podemos usar aquilo? Como é que nós podemos usar tudo que a gente documentou?
But this is the big question. How can we use that documentation? How can we make that documentation do something for us and for other people?
Porque hoje em dia muita tecnologia, né, chegou na comunidade indígena, tipo internet, celulares, coisas, por isso que a gente está tentando resgatar nossa cultura através do nova tecnologia, né, como audiovisual.
So this new technology has arrived in our villages. We've got them, we've got the cameras, we've got the phones. How can we use this for advancing our culture, our ideas, our people?
Então é isso.
That's what it is.
Vou deixar a fala do gringo.
And that's why we're going to talk just briefly about the study centre on the Kwikuru and the culture of the Xingu territories in Cameroon. Gringo's going to talk about an idea that we've been working on, the three of us together, and how we're going to do this. But I just want to say that Gringo is one of Brazil's leading designers. You'll have seen his work, you'll have seen the Cirque du Soleil here in New York, he was the last person to design for them. You'll see his work with dance companies from Brazil who come here. You'll see his work on main stages. You go to Geneva, you'll see his Museum of Human Rights that he's designed there. Museum of Jorge Amado in Brazil. I mention that only because I think Takama is a great filmmaker. And so do many other people at festivals that invite him. He's just been invited onto the international jury for the Festival of Short Films in Brasilia. That look, the exchange of look. I want to make sure that we have exchanges between great artists. That's why we're here. That's why Gringo very generously has come in to work on this project. What's this going to mean, this creation of a study centre?
Yeah, we see very strong that art is a very powerful way of communication, because we know that everybody now, every new generation understands the communication by the feelings, by the emotion. And art is a very strong tool to reach this. And we together, we made so many works together that takes all the stuff and the culture of the Kwikuru and Takuman's works into the people with many installations and many things different that we did together with the People's Palace in London and in Brazil also. But our idea here is just to make, how I say, a study center in Canarana. And at the same time, with this study center in Canarana, we made an exhibition that will tour in
Canarana is just a small town, a gateway to the Xingu. So before you go into the Xingu territories, I hope you do come down at some stage, there's a little town, there's an 18-hour coach drive, bus drive from Brasilia. That's where you'll spend the night, you'll have a shower before you get rid of the dust of the rest of the world and take the journey down the river, down the Xingu, to come to their village.
Yeah.
So that's where we want, where IPACs, through the incredible generosity of Mike and his family, that gave land for them to build this study cultural centre. That's going to happen, because Mike and all the great projects that you're going to hear about, they're building a technological centre for their work there. Around that, we're going to create this study centre that enables more people to understand and see and experience the Xingu culture.
Yeah, and this will be happen before the people go to the village. Our idea that they stay some days or a week in studying the culture and everything about the climate change, the forest, and before going to the village. And at the same time, with the institution that we are making the exchange here in the US or in Europe, we will at the same time make also this discussion and doing an art installation that shows the work of Tucumã, and in a way do an experience that that's the same we did in London, that Paul can explain.
I'm just going to show that briefly. But the big difference, I think we all want to work towards, is that we've done this exhibition together in the Horniman Museum in London, famous anthropological museum of the 19th century. But we want to invert that logic. So instead of how do we bring indigenous people into non-indigenous museums, what does it look like if we have an indigenous space in Canarana that's run by, curated by the Xingu peoples, that is inviting us in to think with them in their space. So the study centre that we will create in Canarana together will also be an installation that we'll be able to tour. You're seeing just one bit of it downstairs with the immersive film. Please go and have a look at it. It'll take you right in there, we hope, with that emotion. Building a new ethical relationship, we hope, with objects and with peoples. And also finding a sort of different way to educate, to think together about where we're going. The original installation, as Gringo said, was, Tucumã said, was something we three of us created together for the Horniman exhibition. We tried to involve everything, a soundscape, objects. Kwikuru had donated to the museum 7 objects. We built virtual reality tours, augmented reality experiences that led you to understand what that object was and how it was used, which Tucumã filmed. We created a 3D studio in their village so that they could film those objects and the way in which they're being used. You'll see here, just in some way, people using tablets to look at the object. But what is all this about? Our vision. That an installation that can project the burning issues, that can bring the relevant data, and boy, have these people got data, as you're going to see, and raise these questions that affect the Kwikuru. But we're specific about the Kwikuru, of course we are. It's important to be specific, but clearly we're telling stories about indigenous people in Brazil, and I also think elsewhere. If we bring it to the United States, and that's what's been great about being here, we've had lots of ideas about how we might travel with this installation. Perhaps we might go to Pittsburgh for a month. That's yesterday NYU was saying that they'd like to have it here in New York for a month. But it's not just about these projections or these objects. It's about these people and how they interact. In order to interact, we have to have these people with us. So every time we do the installation, Tucumã and Yablui, some other people in the Kwikuru will always be with it, because it's an installation that enables us to talk and to be in dialogue, to have a different relationship with. So Yablui was with us, to have what we described as this new look on the world, to pick up what Tucumã keeps saying about ways we're looking together. Tá com Anything else you want to say? Tem alguma coisa mais que você quer falar sobre o nosso trabalho?
Então, na verdade, estamos indo agora também para a gente poder fazer outro trabalho junto com outro povo e a gente está crendo, na verdade, eu mesmo sempre peço, a gente não quer só trabalhar com só o povo cuicudo, tem que compartilhar com outros povos também essa ideia.
So this is really important to say that, yes, we've been working together with the Kwikuru, but the idea is that we work with other peoples. The Kwikuru is part of a network of peoples in Brazil, whether it's in Xingu or in other parts of Brazil. So it's always about different ways of exchanging.
Eu acho que é importante isso compartilhar com outros povos também. Não é o povo Kwikuru tem essa cultura, porque tem novos povos praticam esse
So we want to give opportunities for other indigenous peoples to be practicing these sort of partnerships that have been constructed over years, both with Mike over 30 years, with Bruna, the anthropologists, Carlos, decades of work. But how can now the Kwikuru go forward and start establishing different sorts of partnerships that they're leading on?
Acho que é isso. Na verdade, temos 16 povos diferentes no Xingu.
So there are 16 different peoples in the Xingu
A
territory.
gente tem a mesma cultura, né? A cultura que a gente pratica tem 9 povos. Né?
And 9 of those people share the same cultural practices. So there's lots of opportunities for these exchanges going out and opening. And one of those places, that's what it is. One of these places we're going to find that exchange is not here in the United States, or even in Xingu or Brazil, or even London, where I come from, but here in Venice. And this is just where we want to finish, to say, because why we're in galleries like this place, and with people like yourselves, we're interested in moments of exchange. So Gringo was invited to create an installation at the Venice Biennale next year, the Biennale of Architecture. And his first instinct was to turn to Takuma and say, let's do this together. So the installation that you'll see, just a very small part of here that we did in London, that we're going to try and create a way to take it to different institutions in the United States. We are going to launch it next year at the Venice Biennale. What are we going to do?
We want to do this together and as a, how can I say, biggest installation that we are going to use to do here, but we are going to do in Venice, in Giardino, it's outside, inside, and what we want to put in these exhibitions, a lot of things that we achieved here in this encounter that we have, that we are going to put together, but every time through art, in a way that the people could read and could feel more than just to read and to be in a lesson.
This is the poster from the Horniman, which sums up really, I think, what we're all talking about, is how can we connect? What are the lines that we build out from us being here together? We are present here in this room together. Where can we go from this moment? And we're in Venice, the question that the three of us want to ask by building a representation of an Oka, an indigenous house, you can see in these photographs. Imagine a big house that is an intergenerational family home. Imagine a village where houses connect families to community. Imagine a life where a family builds a house to commune with the spiritual worlds of a forest, a river, and the sky. Enter Oka Red. These are our inspirations. And this is in some way a modelling of what we're going to try and do, create an Oka in the middle of the Venice Biennale that will connect out each day to the other spaces. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Gringo Takuma. That was really stunning work. I'd like to just give a little bit of an introduction. Our sponsor, Mr. William Hillman, Bill Hillman. This is a photograph that he took in 1994 when he first visited the village. This is Chief Fukeka. We have a before and after picture yesterday. Chief Lee was giving his presentation with his 1994 photograph behind him, which was quite impressive. There I am at that early stage, 1994. And Amazon Hope is about developing and cultivating the partnerships that we need to combat the really extreme threats that are facing indigenous people. We all know why we're here. This is a simulation or a prediction of what the Amazon may look like in 2030. This is by Dan Nepstead and his colleagues. And green, obviously, is forest. So this is an Amazon very different than you're familiar with seeing. The Xigu people, Chief Fukaka's village is right here. This is ground zero of what's been characterized as an Amazonian tipping point. An Amazonian tipping point, or a tipping point ecologically, is when the resiliency, in this case of forests, collapse and it oscillates into a different ecological regime. And we're talking about macroscopic, macro-ecological system. So obviously this is a very different image of the future than we're accustomed to seeing. Most people look at the Amazon as primordial forest, relatively simple indigenous people who live one with nature, more or less as they did in the past. Well, all of that is changing, and this is why we've gathered here. We've been working very hard for 3 days. You can probably tell all of the speakers are a little exhausted, at least in my case, stumbling on our words. This is due to deforestation through agricultural and pastoral development, but as you all know, the Amazon is also threatened by fires. As Marcelo may mention, there are, over 90,000 fire spots or hot spots in the Amazon this year alone. Here are a couple of other simulations. This is the Amazon forest green and deforestation red in 2006. This is by Bertaldo Suarez Filho and his colleagues, and according to the business as usual model, in other words, if people keep doing things as they've done, this is his prediction for 2050. Now again, that's Dan Nepsted's for 2030. He has a more rapid framework, and it turns out it's starting to look like maybe his is more accurate. But one thing that I want to point out is these remaining islands of green are primarily indigenous areas. That's why we say indigenous areas are the primary barrier against the collapse of this ecological system. If the Amazon is going to tip, it's going to tip from the southeast and cascade into the forest. So this is what we call the Southern Amazon Indigenous Firewall, getting not only researchers and NGOs and the public involved in this, networking, but also getting the indigenous people together and working together because it is the best and last line of defense against losing this major ecological biome. Well, this is 2006 when this was published. And what Bertaldo and Dan hadn't factored into their models is when the first centennial drought happened in 2007, and I think you're all familiar with the centennial flood, worst flood that happens in 100 years. Well, the centennial drought is the first that happened, is the worst drought that happens in 100 years. Well, that was catastrophic. When it happened in 2010, we think, oh wow, bad luck, you get two of them in a row. When it happened in 2012, and 2014, and 2015, when the extreme El Nino occurred in 2016, and half of the forests in Fukaka's territory, which formerly was entirely forested, were impacted by major forest fires, people didn't understand when they made these models that climate itself was changing. This is a model of 2010, 2014, 2015. Brown and red equals bad. That's dry. And particularly we're in an El Nino year. El Nino means this entire southern tier dries out. Now in the Xigu Basin itself, in a basin where you've deforested all of the edges, in other words, you've changed the evaporation patterns and the runoff patterns, well, this isn't going to be an island of forest anymore. We're already seeing it dry up. We're already seeing the forests die off without deforestation. We're already seeing the forest fires impact this area. This is why this is an urgent problem. What we're here for, Amazon Hope, is there is hope. But we may be looking at the last decade that we can actually affect a change. And the partners who are here, we have people who will be speaking after me from the Instituto Socioambiental, the Social Environmental Institute, one of the primary NGOs and the principal NGO working in this contiguous protected and indigenous area we call the Xingu Corridor, the Environmental Defense Fund, Steve Schwartzman, obviously people who have already spoke, the Museo Nacional, the Museo Gelbi, the People's Palace Project, Chief of Fukakan, the other Mikuru, Yanikola Ajabi, Suya is here to talk. And we are all here because we are ready to build these partnerships and asking for others to participate in that activity. This is the Xingu Corridor, and you can see obviously red is the deforested areas, and the brown area is indigenous, this green area, contiguous protected area called the Teatro Mayo. What we're trying to do is establish putting the digital technologies into the hands. You've seen that in terms of cultural preservation and cultural representation, the integration of museums. We're also trying to do that with geospatial technologies, putting the most sophisticated mechanisms in their hands. As Marcelo may mention in the next talk, there was a success story just yesterday of how people use the technologies on their cellular phones to contact people to avoid and get authorities to intervene in an invasion of people into their territory. We need to do that to know where the fires are, to know where the forest is dying on, where are the fish dying, as well as where we have success stories, where indigenous people actually are preserving their forests. And here is an image of what that looks like. This is the very edge of the Xingu indigenous territories, and this obviously is the indigenous area, and this is the adjacent ranch. When I first went and lived with the Kwikuru in 1993, well, this was all forest. When you drive in there today, I'd liken it to driving through the gates of Jurassic Park, like you're going from the present back into the deep past, into the primordial forest of human societies, and like they were in times past. This massive wall of forest. Well, that is starting to erode. It's starting to die off. This is, Paul mentioned, the Cultural Center in Kanarana. This is the Tanguru River. And this is the headwaters of the Tanguru River in Kanarana. We were able to acquire a piece of land way back in 1993 along the headwaters. And this is where the Kwikuru are currently building a village and town. And it's not to create an antagonistic position in town. It is to do exactly what Paul and Takuma were describing, to build partnerships. We built a large traditional house on that cultural center property, and it was a remarkable thing. I spent a lot of time in Kanarana over the years, traveled through there for several decades, and the people in Kanarana know indigenous people. They just live a couple hundred miles away, but they see them in town like on the street, wearing dirty clothes, not having a place to stay, in a marginalized position. When we were building this house, all kinds of school kids came. They know these indigenous, they'd never seen an indigenous house. And they were just fascinated by it. It's a place where the indigenous people could show the power and the integrity of their indigenous cultures. Takuma Kamioda, a wise chief in Paje, this is for the New York Times, said, the only threat he could remember rivaling climate change was a measles virus that arrived deep in the Amazon in 1954 and took away 90% of the Kamioda community. Climate change is even a greater threat in terms of how they feel. Obviously, the indigenous people are prepared to make partnerships to defend not only their lands and lives, but also, as I think Takuma and Paul so eloquently stated, They're in it with us. They recognize that the Amazon forest is important for all of us, that it needs to be protected. They're ready. They're there. Are we? Our partnership, as I mentioned before, has been built up over 3 decades. It's a social relationship, not really a research relationship. Kwikudu is my brother, sincerely my brother. We get involved in other people's lives. Bill Hillman provided in 1992 the first 2-way radios with a solar panel. When there was no roads, there was no communication, no running water, no filtration, no sewage, no electricity. Put in a 2-way radio, why? Because people were dying. I saw it save people's lives. Way back then, that was the first installment. And then in 1999, a large community launch to bring people who were not well or needed to get to the town up to the city. This is a very long-term partnership. And so that's why Bill invited us to come here to his gallery, Affirmation Arts, to talk amongst ourselves, to try and create a unified network of people working in the area. The people in this room I've known for many years, but we haven't had an opportunity to work closely together. And this was it, but also to present to the world, to invite you here and say, what do we do? What hope is there against these seemingly insurmountable problems of fire and deforestation, ecological degradation? This is a photograph from Sebastião Salgado, the chief of Fukaka, which is down in the exhibition. Another photograph that Carlos Fausto took that he mentioned. Megi is in the house, Takuma is in the house, here to not only preserve their culture, but again, to build this partnership and the current initiative, which is to take the information that we've gathered over the years, the technology we've used, and put them in the hands of the young Kwikudu to defend their lives. One of the things that we found, it was mentioned, this very deep history. We have archaeologically demonstrated that the Kwikudu and the related Xingu people have been there for nearly 2,000 years, back to the time of Christ, with an integrated civilization, truly. This is a traditional house, just like they live in today. This is the Kwikudu village in 2003, just as they live in today. And these are archaeological sites that we've been able to map that are about 800 years old. You might notice something about them. Where there's one Kwikudu village, there's multiple of these very large settlements. They didn't have lost cities in the Amazon. There really is no such thing as a lost city in the Amazon. But I call these garden cities, these remarkably connected and integrated systems. All of these road networks that you see here in red, these big ditches built around villages. Well, 800 years ago, something was going on in the Xingu. It's what's called the medieval warm period. It was the warmest period of climate in the past 4,000 to 5,000 years. And one wonders, when it was warm the last time, and maybe the Xingu forest dried up, maybe they created these roads and ditches as fire barriers, as a mechanism to adapt to that. The way they managed the forest. Oh, sorry. I'll get back to the way they manage the forest in another based on palynological core. Here the Kwikudu excavating a house. That house, which is from about 1450, is identical to the contemporary house. And it's no mystery to them. This is an entirely Kwikudu team. And when we found manioc griddle support, they roast manioc flatbread on these big griddles, and they have little support underneath it. They call it an undagi. When we found an undagi there, all of a sudden, the Kwikudu said, oh wow, this is the kitchen. The front door is going to be right over there. The hammocks are right over there. Sure enough, when we excavated it, there it was. This absolutely remarkable, unparalleled cultural continuity that represents the integrity of this cultural system through time. But also, we might notice that the villages were 10 to 15 times as large. And where there's one, there was 10 to 15 times as many of them. This culture, as Chief Takuma said, that went under an epidemic collapse of 90%. Well, that was only one epidemic over a period of 500 years. The Xinguang population reached its lowest population about 1950, 500 people. There was probably 100,000 there in 500. And now we're looking at threats to these people that perhaps pose an even more radical threat, an existential crisis, that they may not be able to survive in their current extent if the forests that they live in die away. That's a forest fire. That's 2016. As I said, that was a particularly dry year. It's an extreme El Nino year, and El Nino years are always dry. These fires are diurnal, so they expand rapidly in the daytime and then slow down in the night. So you get this banded part. But this entire area that it burns seems like it had actually been used as the productive landscapes to support these large villages. The only thing is, well, still not leading up to it. I'll get to that analogy in a moment. They didn't convert the land from forest to open farmland. They converted it from forest to forest. And it seems that through that conservation, or excuse me, that conversion and that management, that they actually improved forest resilience. And during this time, the medieval warm period, when the forests probably should have started dying off, they actually flourished. And I think that's through human influence. Here's the fires in that time. Fire is the primary tool, the primary technology that indigenous people have to manage these landscapes. And in a normal year, those fires are relatively controlled. This is 2016. This is what happens under the present conditions. Well, when one of those fires happens once, those are big trees, they're very strong and powerful, and so the fire doesn't wipe them out. But you can do a second or a third fire in that same area, and you wipe out the seed banks. And all of a sudden, forest resilience collapses. Here's the distribution. This is a map of the Instituto Social Ambiental showing the extent of these 2016 fires. That's 1 year. The Amazon is burning. It also shows the correlation between these large clusters of pre-Columbian sites and the areas that burn. These correlations are important to know. Also, the fires went up the headwaters of some of these streams. Chief Fukaka mentioned Lake Tafanunu. This is Lake Tafanunu. Well, after it burned, we flew over, and one thing I can tell you for sure is these kinds of parallel rows, that's not a natural phenomenon. This isn't a lake, it's an aquarium. They had systems of management, not only of the forest, but of the wetlands, that were so sophisticated. They were far more advanced than contemporary towns in medieval Europe. It truly is a civilization. Yes, they did not build stone structures, and they did not pack people in one single town, but their technologies for managing the forest, the wetlands, and their landscape, the regional integration and urban planning, far outstripped many contemporary civilizations that were accustomed to, oh, fine, yeah. We're at our pathological core. And the point here is, this is not a mystery to us that this area may tip. This is a pollen core, that's about 3,500 years. This is grass. The Upper Xingu was Cerrado, grassland, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. That was the warmest time in the past 10,000 years. And so we know that naturally this can oscillate between tropical savanna and tropical forest. Why didn't it do it in the medieval warming period? I believe because of the indigenous people. As someone mentioned yesterday, forests don't protect themselves. It's the indigenous people and the traditional people that live in those forests that can potentially protect them. And that's what we're trying to do, is develop the technologies and put them directly in the hands of the indigenous people to monitor these things, to watch them, and to see where things like fire and forest die-off and deforestation are happening. Here's Chief Fukaka looking at one of these primary roads, which, as I said, when Previ Fogo or prevent fire, which is a component of the Brazilian Environmental Protection Agency, went in to do controlled burns and fire barriers in this area. They actually use technologies that are very similar to what their ancestors used. So they make sense to them. It's really a remarkable thing. And it gives not only a basis for us to understand these processes, but it's a language to communicate between researchers, between NGOs, between the public and the indigenous people themselves. This is what we call the Xingu Indigenous Network. We're trying to establish a geospatial observatory by installing these technologies. This is what we were fundraising for, very thankfully, through kind matching funds, which are a one-to-one match. If anyone would be interested in donating, the Pennywise Foundation website, we're collecting donations, and for every dollar, we have a match for another dollar. To do what? To create this network. One hub is the Kwikudu village. They have the capacity through work like Takuma described, to do everything we do here in the city, to connect up, to be in real-time communication, to pass information across. We need a little bit more technology, and that's what we're trying to install today. What we're trying to fund for is putting clean labs in their villages. We need to increase the bandwidth, because when you get there and you have 30 youngsters, young Kwikudu on Facebook at the same time, we can't synchronize the data, the GPS data. We need to increase the bandwidth. We need to keep the ants from making an anthill out of a computer. That happened once. From the bats invading it. It's not hard. We can have these created, air-conditioned, solar-powered, and get the local folks themselves to maintain and use these. And successfully, I believe, we have made that first step. Our goal in the Amazon Hope was to raise enough funds to install one in the Kwikudu village, to show that we can do it. And the reason we started there is because of this long partnership. We had the technology already in place to do it. This is the cultural center that Paul mentioned, a village and town on this piece of land that Fuka and I were able to acquire 3 decades ago. Now is the time to install this village and town and to create a connectivity so they have the resources of town in one of those hubs connected to the resources in the village, but also, as Paul mentioned, to create a meeting place for different peoples to communicate, for them to represent their culture to the outside world without having to have people come in and visit their villages. They can actually experience Kwikudu culture in town. This is a photograph by our dear friend Jim Peterson, who was deeply involved in this work and tragically taken from us in 2005. The question is this sunset over Lagoa Aharita, or perhaps sunrise over Apatsi Lake? There's still hope. And with that, I'd like to pass it to my colleague Steve Schwartzman to talk a little bit more about the larger picture of how the Amazon fits into the world. Steve, this is another 1994 photograph. Thank you very much.
So when we think about global environmental problems, climate change crisis, food security, water supply, prospect of mass extinctions, we typically don't think about culture, identity, language in the same mental space. So we're thinking in terms of economics, we're thinking in terms of what we require for large-scale drivers and so on. We don't think about identity and culture and language in those terms. So, what I want to show here is that we really do need to be thinking of these things together. Before I do that, I want to just point out that when we're talking about identity and culture, it is absolutely true, and no one has shown this better than Michael Heckenberger and his work with you can find traditions in indigenous societies that go back thousands of years, uninterrupted, and with every continuity. Maybe more so in some ways than the other Shingu than other places. I would say you can see some of those in this picture as well. But at the same time, it is absolutely true that these cultures are not static, and they've never been static. They are engines of production, of diversity, in terms of language, culture, artistic expression, and so on. You have only to look at the map of, ethno-linguistic map of the Amazon, or even the Americas, to see that there's been this vast, permanent process of production of diversity. So this is a dynamic process and always has been. So before I get to this, to why we need to think about culture, when we think about climate change, I want to introduce you to my friend, Grandon. He's a Banana Indian, he's about my age. When he was a young guy at the end of the 1960s, he was doing extremely well, making a living, hunting and fishing with bows and arrows and clubs, and clearing his garden with a stone axe. And then the government ran a road, BR 163, right through the center of his territory. And in the space of about 5 years, at least 60% of the previous population died of introduced diseases. The government then picked up a handful of survivors, and relocated them to what was then the Shingu National Park, now known as the Shingu Indigenous Territory. From their perspective, a completely different planet and a much worse one than where they were before. I came to know him at the early 80s when I went to do field work in his village, lived there for a year and a half, learned his language. Years later, he called upon my friend and colleague, André de los Boas, who was just here, but and me and a few other people that he knew, to help him with some new ideas that he was developing. We wanted to go back and see what had happened to his traditional territory. I've been for more than 15 years in the Shingu Park. He's never been able to see what happened to their traditional territory. They asked if we helped them. We said yes. They got back. They discovered that the core of the territory was just blown away. Colonization projects. There's the culprit. But the next river basin over that they had prior to 1968, traditionally occupied, there was an attack area across the state of Delaware. It was just beginning the process of illegal subdivision of the land to sell off with Elijah. Totally illegal, but then the form was still, then and still in many places, the most common form of land occupation in the Amazon. Their reaction was, will you help us? This is ours, we want to come back. And we said yes. Long story short, they got back just in time to stop the process of illegal subdivision. It was put out, or get the National Indian Foundation to put out people who were trying to occupy the territory. Now they're there, the population has a few years ago passed the pre-1968 population for the first time. There's 600 and some, 50 some people already, and they're doing super well. You go out and you talk to Kantama about his territory and this process of return. He can give you dozens and dozens of reasons why he and his people are much better off where they are now than where they were before. But he has a very serious dilemma, which I'm going to come back to. But so the point of the story is, it's not just Kanekamo's story. It's not just the Banana story. It's the story of the Amazonian Indians, Brazilian Indians of the second half of the 20th century and the first part of this century, who survived the frontier. And you put that together with the other 240 some indigenous societies of the Amazon, and you can understand how the indigenous people went from having, when the story started, opening the Amazon frontier, generic constitutional rights to their territories and virtually nothing on the ground, to having you can see the indigenous territories in green, along with the bright green, fainter green are protected areas, which are actually also all occupied by traditional communities and not indigenous per se, which together are close to half of the Amazon. So this is and extremely important development, not only for indigenous peoples, not only for the Amazon. These territories, in spite of all the threat that Mike described so clearly and so well, are extremely effective in stopping deforestation. You see here some territories, particularly fires around the outside. And by and large, that's still what happens in most of the territories. Where the indigenous land starts, the frontier stops. And this is one of the very most important reasons why Brazil was able to reduce its deforestation so much between 2004 and 2012. Brazil is still, in spite of everything that's happened since, the world leader in reducing greenhouse gas emissions because of that. Well, at the same time, it was increasing its agricultural production. This is the holy grail of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. You break the link between production and greenhouse gas emissions. Well, those indigenous territories and protected areas, this is planetary limitation. Surveys are looking at this above ground carbon stocks in the indigenous territories and protected areas. More than half of all of the above ground carbon stocks. It's more than the combined above ground carbon stocks of the DRC and Indonesia. This is enough carbon to have a real relevance to what happens to our planet's atmosphere. So it makes a big difference whether it stays in the trees or stays in the trees or going to the atmosphere. Well, so Fantoma's dilemma, to conclude here, is culturally, it's very important to him to preserve that forest. He doesn't want to cut it down, but he doesn't want to be poor in the white people's world and economy. His real options are really rather cool. They're either unsustainable or very low value. But so he needs better options. But so the cultural part continues to be extremely important. And if you listen to what the indigenous leaders say about the relation to their resource base, they all basically say the same thing. The forest is our culture, and we are the forest, and the forest is us. So that relationship is critical to all this process of defense of the forest, which is to achieve these results that are so valuable to the planet. At the same time, he wants access to cities, to technology, to all the things that Michael was talking about. And he needs better incentive. Personally, I think through the international climate negotiations and other emerging carbon markets, we have opportunities to create some of those incentives for him as well as for people positioned on various sides of the frontier who are doing the right thing as he is. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We're going to have Marcelo Salazar from the Instituto Social Ambiental. He's going to bring us back into the Shingle corridor and talk about some of the remarkable work that he has been doing in the Amazon. This is not the Amazon, but coming soon.
This is a satellite image without very high resolution.
High resolution.
I thought it was easy.
Nothing's ever easy, Marcelo. You know that.
That is.
Are there any questions while we have a moment? Or will we just take a little pause and breathe? Yes, Chris?
I have a question. You said that you're tracing populations back 2,000 years. Is it 2,500? Is it 3,000? We don't know. Or it is 2,000?
About 2,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, real clear back to about 1,500. And then we have some materials that are not quite as clear. As always, for the archaeologist, the deeper you go in time, the more kind of you have to look at it like an impressionist painting. And so we're very clear documentation, again, the ceramics they make, the houses they construct, the form of their villages, the relationship of their villages to one another, and to features of the landscape like wetlands, show this remarkable continuity. And so when we find a plaza, like we saw in the village today, in the past, we can chase that down and demonstrate this continuity that we, at the very least, have back to 1500. And then the deposits are not quite as clear, but I'm pretty certain it goes back to 2000, perhaps even a little more. Yes, sir.
And the 2 mile deep cores that
Oh, well,
happening, is that
our friend Paul Baker from Duke University, who was going to come in between his trips to Paris and China, is initiating a project along the Amazon River itself. They're going to do 5 cores that may go down to 2 kilometers deep. It's going to completely revise what we think about the deep geological and environmental history of the Amazon. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, so we're going to have to save that for next year's hope. But really a truly remarkable project. Never been done. We don't really know what the deep geological history of the Amazon is.
We got it. So, good afternoon. My name is Marcelo Salazar. I work for the Social and Environmental Institute, which is one of the biggest NGO in Brazil working in this issue. So we work in the Xingu River, Black River, and in the Atlantic Forest in south of Brazil. And we have also an office in Brasilia doing, the other side. Working in Brasilia, doing, like, push the policy in the government to look after indigenous populations, traditional communities, and the forest. I will start my presentation with a little video, a 1-minute video. It's about we did for our 25 years anniversary.
We are here.
What are they? Yeah. So, great. This is the guy.
We are here, and have been for thousands of years, and despite everything, we continue determined and strong, standing firm. You can pretend you aren't bothered, that you aren't looking, but we're here, fighting for a long time, and now, more than ever, fighting against the clock. If there's any diversity left in the forest, it's thanks to us. If there's rainfall in the city or the countryside, it's also thanks to us. If medicine has somewhere to look for new cures, it's because we're here. But we can't go on being ignored, spending our lives being pushed out of the way. That's why we're going to keep on resisting, determined, standing firm, because we are the forest. And the forest is us.
Eu queria stani.
우리 대리야마 가라이 차데마드.
Ataque do Caacho.
Nem por aqui comer. E a floresta somos nós.
Okay, so as you can see in this video, and you're going to see in the presentation, is where there is forest people, there is forest. Why is this so important? Like, we are in a climate crisis. Like, our house is on fire, the Amazon rainforest is on fire as well. Like, for who didn't hear the speech of Greta Thunberg in the last UN conference, please watch. It's a very powerful message as well. And Cacique Raoni is running the word, awareing people and trying to get support for this fight. Unfortunately, Raoni didn't get the Nobel Prize just today, but I think he was close and he deserved it. Like the trees in the forest are not so important only to the indigenous people, but also to regulate the climate. Like the Amazon rainforest is important for our life. The trees works as a water pump, regulating the water flow into the sky, as you can see in this image. So, in Brazil, there are 722 indigenous lands and more than 1,000 conservation units. And most of them are in the Amazon rainforest. More than 250 indigenous people spread out along Brazil. In the Amazon rainforest, almost 50% are legally protected areas. Indigenous people or conservation units. And as we can see, the deforestation and the fire are mainly outside those areas. So there is an arc of deforestation. And one of the barriers are the Xingu indigenous protected areas, the area we are focused on this project. It works like a firewall. I'm sure everybody has equipments, very important information in computers in our house and office. And to protect it, many people have a firewall. Like Xingu River is a kind of a firewall for our lives. Because without the forest, the life on the planet will not happen. So just this year, 93,000 spots of fire happened in the Amazon rainforest. It's a lot. Like the Xingu River, this firewall, it's a house of 30 indigenous lands talking 24 different languages. This is amazing. Like this is how they look like. In addition of indigenous people, there are the rubber tappers, another kind of traditional communities. Small agriculture as well, that supports and manages the forest. And we are in trap, we are on fire. And what to do about it? One thing is resistance. Like we need to resist, we need to get together and do protests, legal actions, monitor, report of threats at Waterby. We'll talk more in the next talk. We have in Xingu this network, Xingu Plus network. There is a 1-minute video, like a message from the Xingu. Can you help me just to click on this? We have meetings every 2 years with leaders in Xingu River, NGOs, and other partners, like some donors, to discuss strategies, to see what is going on in the area, the main threats and how to deal with them. Sorry. This is the message from the last meeting.
Estamos na aldeia Cubencata, terra indígena Becromotiras, tudo Pará. Enquanto o mundo reza para a Amazônia, com medo do que pode acontecer no futuro, nós nos reunimos, todos os povos do Xingu juntos, querendo dizer que vamos seguir resistindo pela floresta, pelo nosso modo de vida, para produzir sem destruir, pelo futuro dos nossos filhos e netos, pela saúde do planeta. Por isso dizemos não ao garimpo em nossas terras, não ao desmatamento. Chega de invasões e desrespeito. Chega de veneno em nossos rios e alimentos. Chega de queimada criminosas. Nós aqui no Xingu estamos conectados com você, todos em defesa da Amazônia. Nós estamos na linha de frente e precisamos do seu apoio. Lute ao nosso lado.
information in this website, and the indigenous peoples use those informations as well. It's not only information for people from outside, but it's a way of network for them as well. So, one case related to this network is the Xikrin. In one of the areas in the Xingu Basin, they were invaded, and they mobilized like prosecutors, partners, media, and they got information. They sent maps to the federal prosecutors, and it started like a movement, an action. And at the end, like just this week, the federal police did the remotion of the land grabbers from their land. So give us I got a message from a young guy in the village that sent me a WhatsApp audio. Like, oh, it really happened. And during this time, they was sending WhatsApp audios to the federal prosecutors, to us, to the media, and to all other partners. So what I think we will explain a little bit more, like how we can connect the traditional knowledge and technology to resist, to create another models, another way of life, another world. Another thing is invest in forest products and service, like goods, tourism, films and exhibitions, and environmental services. It's a complex concept that we will not talk here, but it's something to figure out. Invest on infrastructure to them, like they need energy, transport solutions, like communication, improve the communication, and this is very important for them. Valorizing cultural heritage, like people talk a lot about it. And now, whatever I will, like, and Jakob Nucula will talk a little more deeper for some of the things I talked here. Thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce my colleague, we've been working together for the past 3 years in upgrading the long-time mapping and GIS project. He's brought it into the next generation through the Puente Institute. Chris Mathias is also here. And in their partnership with Esri, they have donated the license for the online GIS. And through the Puente Institute, we're hoping that any indigenous group or any of the traditional communities along the Xingu corridor, we can do the same thing, to create portals that are in their control. And whether we do our show.
Okay, everybody still awake? We're going to talk a little bit about some of the maps we'll talk that you've seen, some other elements. As you may imagine, getting into the Xingu is not easy. It takes a long time. It's a part of a 15-hour bus ride, so a couple flights, bus ride, boats. So when systems that are designed to work in the village to help communicate with the outside aren't provisioned appropriately, it can be tough. Like, how are we going to make all this stuff work if we really can't rely on computing power and that sort of thing? So one of the things we really leveraged is the cloud. We're basically created a secure portal that allows us to work and speak with lots of different organizations and bring together data that we don't necessarily have to collect ourselves, but we can leverage this information. This is one example. On a slide here, this is a map that that Marcelo was referring to, where all the reporting of fires and illegal intrusions happen. Well, this is our portal, and we wanted to bring in their content into the same place so that we can mash up this information, right, without having to duplicate its creation. We can do analysis. We can help inform other sort of workflows. So you may have seen this slide a little bit before, the juxtaposition of the current village of the Potsi here with modern roads and the ancient village here with ditches and what have you. These are precisely mapped to within about less than a meter. And this is huge because there's a lot of complexity with what was going on with water flows, and some of these ditches are quite deep, but some are very subtle. This same portal allows us to drill in not only on the prehistory and the archaeological research that's happened, but it lets us look at the changes in the village itself. Currently, they're moving their village to another plaza, and this happens, I guess, every 10 years or so. And it's a fascinating process, and we can see some of the items in the past that we really want to understand are being replicated in the present, and we can use the GIS to look at that change over time. This is just an example of sort of selecting a feature and realize that every shape on this map is tied to information about when it was collected, how accurate it was, who's allowed to see it. Okay? This is one of my favorites. Basically here we have Chief of Fukaka, Nacimiento Maestro, actually, using the tech, right? So this is really, really important. I can't speak Kikuyu, my Portuguese is horrible, but I can communicate through maps with these guys, and they can communicate with me. We get it up on a sheet in one of the houses and have the projector going, and you see the maps, and you start to hear the different languages being spoken, and they want to pan over here and take their mental map, and suddenly they're able to sort of look at all these versions and where the boundaries are, and what does this all look like from another perspective they've never actually had so easily accessible to them, right? So instead of getting on Facebook, we want to get these young kids to be out there collecting data. And one of the ways that we can do that are these mobile apps that work offline that can synchronize with this cloud secure portal that we've created, right? So on the left, I open up the phone, there's something of interest. We're doing a transect maybe and looking at the different tree types. These are the tree names. The user can actually click on the picture, bring up to make sure that's the actual tree type, because many of these trees look very similar. What we want is consistency, right? We can't always bring chiefly in the forest with us, to tell us what we're doing. We need to make sure that the data we're collecting can be evaluated by someone else, and also that it's going to inform on the question we're really interested in. Here, after they said, oh, I found this interesting tree, they can take a picture of it, they can draw a sketch, you can record a story. It doesn't just have to be about trees, right? It can be about, one of the old timers sitting in their hammock telling a story, or when you're out on the boat in Lake Tafanunu, to get often places sort of trigger stories. And to tie those places to the geography, they're suddenly like, well, this is where I grew up, this is where my compo was. We went and had fish and a barbecue on the beach, and it was just amazing where Chief Lee had lived. That data, once someone's connected back to the internet, even slow internet, once we locked everybody out of Facebook, we can actually do the syncing. These little dots are tied to these points, right? So I can look at them and click on them and get specific things, but I can also run a systematic analysis and say, show me all those for a particular researcher, pull out the data they're interested in, right? And make it super easy for them to access. There's another smaller site there. This is the circuitous route into Lake Tafanunu, which is just an amazing place. And we, of course, can link the photos, everything you can do on the web that you'd expect. But again, every point on the map is tied to not only the information about it, not only the data itself, but what is the metadata? How do we use this? How do we trust it? Another interesting thing we can do, we can bring into the equation imagery and other types of spectral imagery that are actually show us different things. This is just a picture of the forest. It looks green. Well, this is what's really revealed when we use multispectral imagery. And this is one of these banded forest zones. This was obviously very circular. This is like something from outer space, right? Well, now we actually have the chance to walk through this forest area. It doesn't look like that on the ground. We're trying to understand these patterns of fire. Well, it's another tool. We didn't have to put a satellite up in space and pay for that. We can also click on the map and get all this historical data. And just to breeze through a few other items, geomorphology, all these different factors, the amount of water moving through the system. And furthermore, we can do analysis right in the web browser. So you don't have to be a geek like me to actually participate in the science or in the story that you're telling, right? And under the hood is a portal with a bunch of computers that are connected to the internet and all kinds of fancy stuff like that. But the beautiful thing is it's configured in a way that we can share securely amongst different groups, universities, indigenous people, and make sure that's a secure vault that's authorized for certain people to access that data. And with that, well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last presentation by Nicolas Cajamisuya, he's the president of the Associação Território Indígena do Xingu, the Xingu Indigenous Territory Association. And not only is he going to give a little presentation, but he also has several films that he would like to show. And thank you very much.
Boa tarde. Obrigado por terem vindo para tomar boa aula aqui. Quem é o meu professor?
Ah, a sua língua eu não conheço não.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Bom, hoje estou com o Yatsula, desculpe. Desculpe, eu estou me atrapalhando. Bom, meu nome é Nicolas Cajamisuya. Hoje estou com o presidente da Associação Indígena do Xingu.
So my name is Nicolas Cajamisuya. I'm president of the Xingu Indigenous Land Association.
A nossa associação tem 24 anos de existência e ela foi fundada com o objetivo, na época, com o objetivo de trabalhar com a proteção territorial.
So our association is now 24 years old and it was created with the objective of working on territorial protection.
Quero apresentar para vocês o território indígena do Xingu. Nosso território fica localizado no norte de Mato Grosso, na divisa com o estado do Pará. E ela tem a sua população estimada em 7.500 indígenas. E essas 7.500 indígenas estão distribuídas em 16 povos indígenas. E cada um desses povos indígenas está distribuído num ponto linguístico. Né? O principal ponto linguístico é a Tupi, o Acre, uma língua isolada, que é a Tumai, o Magê e os Caribes.
So our territory is located in the north of the state of Mato Grosso, on the border of the state of Pará. It's a population of 7,500 people. There's 16 indigenous groups which are distributed amongst the 4 major language families of the Amazon, or 4 of the major language families of the Amazon, just one isolated language.
Uma das coisas que nos perguntam é como é que os povos indígenas estão organizados lá dentro. A gente tem um sistema de governança dos povos indígenas do Xingu que conta com a cadeira de cada cacique tradicional de cada um desses 16 povos indígenas. Inclusive, uma das cadeiras é o do cacique Afucacá.
So the people ask us how our association is organized. How are the peoples of the Xingu organized? And we have our own form of government by which there is a chair within the association. There's a place in the association for each of the traditional chiefs of all 16 of these peoples. One of them is for Chief Afucacá, who is here with us today.
As principais deliberações que são tomadas em relação ao território de Xingu são tomadas procurando o máximo de consenso possível entre esses líderes. Esses aqui são alguns momentos onde tem a participação das principais lideranças do Xingu.
So decisions are taken by the maximum extent possible, reaching consensus amongst these traditional leaders. And here are several points of discussion in the association.
As decisões que são tomadas, ela cabe às organizações indígenas no caso aqui, que eu represento, de executar as decisões que são tomadas nessa governança.
So the way that chiefs works is we are here in order to execute, to carry out the decisions that are taken by the chiefs.
Bom, nós acabamos de falar que o modo de vida dos povos indígenas ela é conhecida por proteger a floresta amazônica, a floresta do mundo. Né? E nós somos cientes dessa nossa responsabilidade sobre nossas florestas.
So we've been discussing the importance of the indigenous peoples for protecting the forest, and we have a very clear awareness of our responsibility to, in fact, defend these for us and their planetary importance.
Existe uma ideia de que os povos indígenas são obstáculo para o desenvolvimento do Brasil.
There's an idea that indigenous peoples are an obstacle to the development of Brazil.
É por causa disso que hoje está se trazendo de volta o conceito de que os povos indígenas precisam ser integrados à sociedade brasileira.
And for this reason, this concept that indigenous peoples needs to be integrated in an undiscriminating way into, say, the Brazilian national society is coming back today.
A gente sabe quais são os objetivos disso. Nós sabemos que se houver essa integração que eles falam, os povos indígenas e sua diversidade cultural elas vão desaparecer, né? Desaparecendo os povos indígenas, não há mais razão para se dizer que existe para existir as terras indígenas. É uma forma de dominação, para impor.
So we know that the point of this is essentially to eliminate the cultural diversity of indigenous people, to get rid of it. We know if that happens, there will be no justification, no basis for the indigenous territories of the Amazon.
Uma das formas que o governo pensa de colocar essa integração aos povos indígenas, sob a desculpa de que o índio precisa produzir em suas terras indígenas, é através desse tipo de cultura, através de monoculturas, arrendamentos de terras indígenas.
So one of the things the government, one of the arguments that the government uses to justify this extremely dangerous discourse is to emphasize the importance or to identify monocultures as really the only legitimate form of production.
Bom, a gente sabe que esse modelo não serve para nós. Precisamos que os nossos meios também de fazer isso precisam ser reconhecidos também.
So we know that this model doesn't work for us, and we have our own means of producing a completely different methods.
Bom, esse é dos exemplos de como as terras indígenas podem ser exploradas pelos próprios indígenas a partir de atividades econômicas sustentáveis.
So this is an example of how indigenous territories can be worked by indigenous peoples sustainably.
Aqui está dos exemplos aqui. Em 2017, a produção de mel orgânico do Xingu, dos povos do Xingu, ela foi premiada pelo Prêmio Equatorial do Peru de Roma. Em 2019, desse ano, também esse produto também foi premiado novamente, também pela mesma Prêmio Equatorial, aqui na cidade de Nova York.
So one example is the organic honey from the Xingu 2017. It won the Equator Prize of the United Nations Development Program, and then in 2019 this year, the key oil of Sage also won the same prize here in New York.
A resposta está aqui. A resposta dos povos indígenas é esse modo de desenvolvimento, respeito às culturas e à floresta, né? E que precisa ser incentivada, ser apoiada para que ela continue.
So this is the answer. Indigenous peoples producing in a sustainable way on their lands, a diversity of products. There needs to be incentives for this, there needs to be support for it in order that it can go on and really fulfill its potential.
Para os povos indígenas continuarem fazendo isso, fortalecerem essas experiências, elas precisam se preparar, precisam se fortalecer também através de suas organizações, através da melhoria das suas condições dessas organizações funcionarem.
So in order for this to really succeed, the indigenous peoples also need to be strengthened. Their organizations need to be supported and strengthened. They need better conditions and a better basis on which to work in order to make this diverse approach really viable.
Nós estamos falando de a gente se apossar de algumas coisas, alguns instrumentos que não são da cultura indígena. Estamos falando de apostar nas tecnologias, nos instrumentos, através de que possam fortalecer as nossas mobilizações, a nossa articulação com o governo, que possa também possibilitar diálogo entre povos indígenas também.
So this means that we have to be able to assimilate technologies and instruments that are not part of our traditional culture. includes better infrastructure, it includes support for indigenous mobilizations, for our relations with negotiations with the government, and indeed communication amongst the different indigenous peoples.
Fortalecer as organizações indígenas é fortalecer a autonomia dos povos indígenas. Nos apostar, a gente dominar a tecnologia que hoje o homem branco tem, não faz os indígenas serem menos índios ou deixarem de ser menos índios.
So we're talking about taking hold of and becoming fluent and conversant with these technologies that outside culture has, but it's important to note that our learning to dominate these technologies does not mean that we are any less indigenous people than we were before.
A gente não dominando essas ferramentas que possam nos ajudar, a gente está se submetendo a uma situação como essa, a uma realidade como essa.
So unless we learn to really dominate these technologies and to assimilate them into our strategies, we are going to end up being subject to this kind of strategy here.
Quero agradecer todas as que apresentaram anteriormente a mim agora aqui, são pessoas que conhecem as nossas realidades, são pessoas que trabalham há muitos anos com os povos indígenas, que percebem o que nós estamos passando hoje e é por isso que nós estamos aqui hoje com todas essas pessoas. Obrigado.
I want to thank you and say it's really great to be here with so many people who have worked for so long with indigenous peoples and understand our issues and are here today to support us. Thank you.
A couple films.
To close out the day, we have a couple of films that were made by the indigenous folks themselves. One vai fazer uma apresentação para introduzir. He's going to introduce for you Battle Line Free Day. We'll see it.
And while they're getting loaded, just after we're done, there's a reception that starts at 5 o'clock downstairs. You're welcome to go and look at the exhibit. And I didn't mention before that we are from Pennywise Foundation. There's a sign-in book downstairs. If you would please leave your email, we can keep you posted on all the updates as the project progresses. We would love for you to sign in. There's some indigenous art for sale that you are welcome to buy and support right in the back of the room, and so we welcome you to do that as well.
And I noticed that they were set up for the reception already, so I don't think they're going to turn you away from the open bar if we arrive before 5.
And speaking of the reception, opportunity to thank Affirmation Arts. Mike Allen is here from Affirmation Arts. Mike and Dennis installed the exhibit, have been working tirelessly for many years actually, but for this exhibit. So thank you to Mike Allen and Affirmation Arts.
Não sei, eu estou vendo aqui o West. Can we proceed?
Yes. We're working on it. Talk amongst yourselves.
Wait. Are we looking for the line by set? Wow.
A gente vai fazer uma outra apresentação aqui em relação ao tema mulheres.
You're going to present now another small video whose theme is women.
E para isso eu quero convidar a nossa linguista Bruna Franqueto, por favor, a gente apresentar esse juntos.
For this reason, I want to invite our linguist, uma franqueta to present it with me, together with me.
Bom, a gente está num momento também muito empolgante em relação à participação da mulher indígena nos debates, nos espaços de discussão antes dominados pelos homens.
Oh, sorry. It's, I was acting as a photographer, not as a... we are in a very important moment. We have been discussing the presence of women and their participation in domains that normally were only taken by men.
O vídeo agora mostra como é que as mulheres indígenas do Xingu elas estão se mobilizando também para poder chegar nesses espaços, nessas mobilizações a nível local, a nível regional e também a nível nacional. Né? Esse vídeo aqui, ele mostra como é que elas começaram a fazer uma campanha para poder mobilizar as mulheres do Xingu para um evento maior a nível nacional que aconteceu no mês de agosto, chamado a primeira Marcha das Mulheres.
This video here shows the way women are organizing themselves to participate in politics and even in the national arena. And as we're going to see in the mobilization that took place a month ago, a month ago in Brasilia at the Federal Capital.
Just
Yes, go ahead.
Because the second video will be on the individuals very much.
That's not for translation, we're talking to each
A mulher sempre teve a sua voz calada. E com a gente não foi diferente, porque a indígena, antes de ser indígena, ainda é mulher. E como toda mulher, precisa lutar pelos seus direitos. E é por isso que a gente tem que se unir. Porque uma só voz não basta, nem duas, ou três. Quanto é alto o bastante? 5? 10? 20? A gente vai reunir quantas forem preciso, com um objetivo em comum: resistir. As mulheres são vitais para o futuro do planeta. São as verdadeiras gigantes pela própria natureza. São quem protege a nossa cultura. Quem agora vão proteger também as nossas terras. Juntas resistimos. Demarcação já.
de alguns amigos, né, da Guatapacalua aqui, que é a minha esposa, que é essa primeira do vídeo aqui, que foi no sentido de mobilizar alguns possíveis apoiadores, né, por isso que aparece... Ah, desculpa.
Go ahead. Pode.
É por isso que no final aparece o número da conta que é para apoiar na época, né, para possibilitar que haja condição para levar as mulheres para a marcha das mulheres.
This video was made with the assistance of friends of my wife, who is the first one here in the middle, and in a way to organize and to have financial support to organize the protest in Brasilia, in the federal capital, later on. That's why at the end there is the number of the account for donation, etc. It was at that time. It's not for now.
Bom, no mês de junho de 2019, desse ano, as mulheres fizeram uma outra mobilização também para decidirem se querem criar um departamento, um setor dentro da Associação Terra Indígena Xingu. Nessa assembleia, elas decidiram por dizer sim. Hoje, a coordenação das mulheres ela é chamada de ATIX Mulher, que é o setor responsável por toda a atenção para a mulher xinguana.
In June, there was a meeting among the women in order to decide if they want to have a special department section within the General Association, the Indigenous Association of the Xingu territory, ATIX in Portuguese. So to decide it, they said, yes, we want it, we need a section for us, so that now we have the ATIX Mulher, ATIX Woman.
Bom, no próximo momento, a gente vai ver qual foi o resultado dessa campanha, dessa mobilização, na participação das mulheres xinguanas na primeira Marcha das Mulheres.
So the next presentation, in the next presentation, we're going to see what were the results of this work of organization for them to participate in the protest in the federal capital.
So this first march, the Women March, in August of this year in Brasilia, in the middle of the building of the different ministries, we have the government palace in Brasilia. It's a proof that the women movement, indigenous women movement in Brazil is growing and growing each day, each month, and each year. So this means that I hope that next steps, next meeting of this including project will have indigenous movement participating with us. But I think this is the first necessary development of the project, including of women. Women are ready to participate with their knowledge, specific knowledge, with their songs and with their feelings and with their emotions. And just remember that the first indigenous representative in the federal representative house is an indigenous woman, Joanne Wapchan, from the north of Amazonia. After Marijuna, many years ago, the adventure of Marijuna, the political adventure of Marijuna, we have a woman, an indigenous woman, in the House of Representatives in Brazil. So, the near future, no, the present and the near future will show the force of indigenous women and old women, or Brazilian women, and old women of this world, inclusive as the women that are here. Thank you.
Presentation that we showed yesterday. To go through the presentation. Yes, this is the time. Is this one? That's his presentation. This is a presentation. Yeah. No. That's was a presentation. This is a different. There is another one. Do we have still? The volume of time. Okay, wait.
Are there any questions while we're trying to bring up this last presentation?
Yeah, I
Want to still wait?
Yeah.
Okay.
I suppose.
All right. Thank you.
All right. That's a presentation. Yeah. You want the video? Is the video a apresentação, não é isso?
Quando nós começamos a conversar sobre
se juntam nesse momento aqui em Brasília e nós vamos chegar aqui no Congresso Nacional, porque precisa da nossa presença aqui, né? Para poder mostrar que nós sim, né, estamos aqui ensinando como se fazer democracia.
E assim, eu acredito que todas as mulheres precisam entender o que está acontecendo para elas dizerem, ó, isso aqui não está errado. Eu quero os meus direitos.
E nós estamos aqui em Brasília justamente para dizer que nós somos parte desse país e que esse país ele precisa respeitar os povos indígenas, a começar pelos direitos que já estão aí e que não é nem um favor demarcar terras indígenas, respeitar as mulheres, é um dever do Estado.
Eu estou aqui para defender o território, para defender meus filhos, para defender o meu povo, para defender o povo que mais precisa. Nós somos o primeiro habitante desse país. Então, onde estamos?
Nós perdemos nosso território, nos mataram, nos assassinaram, nos envenenaram, botaram um pouco no outro, mas nós resistimos por conta da nossa ancestralidade, por conta dos microgramas.
Nessa dança é melhor quando estamos juntos. Somos multiplicadores da saúde e vamos seguir multiplicando. Se a gente não tem terra, a gente não tem saúde, a gente não tem educação, e se não tiver terra, território para os povos indígenas, não terá mais lugar, mais ninguém aqui nesse espaço.
Então, assim, que as pessoas observem e nos vejam assim, porque nós somos seres humanos, nós temos sangue e muito sangue, e hoje devemos partir.
há muitos anos na família, mas nós na igreja preparamos o ouvido.
Sobre o primeiro vídeo, algum tradutor?
On the first video,
sobre o primeiro vídeo, eu quero agradecer a quem colaborou com isso, que é a
I would
agência,
like to thank the people that collaborated in doing
a agência de conteúdo Bastidor em São Paulo, o João Uzer, Rodrigo Castro, que ajudaram a elaborar o primeiro vídeo que nós exibimos.
Yes, the people that helped them to make the first video that we have seen.
Bom, quanto à Associação Tempo de Antigu, nós estamos determinados a apoiar as mulheres para que elas consigam atingir seus objetivos.
Yes, for the ATICS, the Indigenous Association of the Xingu Territory, we are determined in supporting women's initiative from them.
Com relação ao segundo vídeo, só lembrar a figura da Sônia Guajajara, que é a presidente da APIB, da Associação dos Povos Indígenas Brasileiros, que talvez seja a federação indígena no Brasil hoje, talvez a segunda ou primeira maior mobilização política. A mídia ninja, que é uma mídia fundamental hoje no Brasil, no mundo, de divulgação muito indígena, e que a Miquiá seja fotógrafo, videomaker.
In regards to the second video, we should remember the role of Sônia Guajajara, who is the president of the Brazilian Association. The articulation of the indigenous people of Brazil, APIB. Also the so-called Media Ninja, which is very important in terms of spreading the news and producing this kind of videos and occupying social media. And Kamikia Kinseji, who is a filmmaker, just like Kumar, and has been covering as a reporter, an indigenous reporter, all these protests in Brazil since a couple of years ago.
Obrigado.
Thank you once again for all being here. We pulled this together over a few short months. It's been just a remarkable experience. Everyone has stepped up to the plate to come and participate with us. It would have been nice to have a year to organize this. And as was just expressed, the next round, we took advantage of the indigenous people that we had visas for, because as many of you know, it's a complicated process to get visas this time. But we see Amazon Hope as a starting point. And precisely what you saw here at the end, this may be the primary theme for the next round that we hope to have and get indigenous women leaders up here to present their point of view. And once again, I just want to thank you. Amazon Hope is a starting place. Thanks so much for your presence. The reception is, I believe, probably ready to go. It's scheduled for 5 o'clock, but for this year group, please have a cocktail on us.
But it's 4:20.
Send her down.
Yeah.